This is the Mahindra factory in Chakan that rolls out the XUVs, the Scorpios, including this, the new big daddy of SUVs, the new Scorpio N. That's what they like to call it. So what do you call a factory that rolls out such satisfactory products? A satisfactory. Sorry, dad jokes. Let's get on with the review. You can click on the link on the screen to watch our detailed walk around of the car. The Scorpio N is designed to be the largest Scorpio yet, with a longer wheelbase similar to the Toyota Innova Crista and wider and taller dimensions than the Toyota Fortuner. But the flat rear end and the slab sides make it look quite MPV-ish when seen from the rear three-quarter. The front end is the prettier angle then, highlighting the imposing stance of this SUV, which I think looks best in white or black or the forest green if you are the off-roading type. The red is a bit too sporty for its heft. The detailing of the headlights is unmistakably Scorpio, but has a better throw and spread than before. The silhouette of the bonnet is typical Scorpio too, and Mahindra says that the face is the tallest and the widest in the class. I wonder how that will affect pedestrian protection in case of a collision, but Mahindra says that the crash member is lower down in the face, which should technically help. The ladder chassis is an evolution of the older Scorpio's frame, and this, along with the larger body, have a better crash structure and crumple zones, despite being fairly lighter than before. The older Scorpio will continue to sell as the Scorpio Classic. This is called the Scorpio N. Scorpion? Certainly not N-line, that would be Hyundai. And looking at the size of the vehicle, you would be tempted to call it the Scorpio XL, or should we call it the XL6? Sorry, dad jokes again. But Scorpion sounds a lot cooler. But does it sting? Let's find out. But let us first talk about the cabin, which is a lot roomier than before, and climbing into it isn't as steep as most other body-on-frame SUVs. Mahindra's love for brown interiors continues, and unlike most modern cars, the Scorpio continues to have a big stack of switches in the center console, all of which fall easily at hand and are exactly where you expect them to be, except maybe the SOS switch, which should have been roof-mounted. This car also comes with connected tech, and in case you have big daddy issues, you also have an SOS switch, which will essentially call the emergency services and also get you in touch with the Mahindra call center if required. Now my favorite segment, let's go nitpicking. You have cruise control, but when you set it, there is no readout for the speed. You can go up and down on the speed, but it will still not tell you what is the set speed. I wonder why. Also, the steering wheel at this price point is only adjustable for tilt. It's not telescopic. Infotainment. I love the infotainment. It's quite nice, very slick. But look at the size of the bezel. So big. Why? They could have just gone with a bigger screen. That would have made it look more premium than what it is. And while the brochure advertises it, there is actually no wireless CarPlay on my system right now. You have only wireless Android Auto. To complement that, you have a wireless charging pad down below, but it's a bit flimsy and it's coming off very easily. It's also caught a lot of dust down below. And plus size phones have a bit of a problem. Even without the cover, they don't quite fit properly and they slide in front very easily. And when they do, the charging actually stops. So that is another bit of a problem. And right next to it, a conventional handbrake. Why don't they have an electronic parking brake at this price point? They ought to have done that. And they certainly should have done a panoramic sunroof for such a big cabin. A panoramic sunroof like the one that they touted about on the XUV 700. That would have been the icing on the cake, at least on the top-end model. They haven't done that either. Let's move on to the things I like. It's 2 decades since the Scorpio originally launched, and now if you were to look at the timeline, look at the different vehicles in the timeline, you will see a massive jump in the fit and finish that they have achieved with the Scorpio N. Especially all these shut lines, they're absolutely consistent. There's nothing to complain about. You get soft touch materials here where you can also see the stitching, looks quite premium, but you get scratchy plastics on the top. But just because these are scratchy plastics doesn't mean that it feels cheap or low rent. It actually doesn't. What I also like is if you look at the size of the dashboard, it's not too big, which also means that it doesn't reflect too much in the windscreen. Even the angle of the windscreen is such that you will not have a lot of intrusion from these reflections when you're driving. But what I really like is the overall fit and finish, the kind of finish that they have now managed to get at this particular price point. It's all very positive. What I also like is the infotainment. The layout is carried over from the XUV700. It's that tile layout. I really like it. It's very easy to use and it's quite slick. I was worried that they might have this good looking layout, but the hardware may not support it. But that's not the case. It's actually quite slick. Getting into any of the menus doesn't take too long. The animations are quite nice as well, and everything is very easy to read even when you're on the go. So you don't necessarily have to take your eyes too far off the road every now and then. The screen is also customizable. You can have your own shortcuts if you so need. You also have shortcuts for your music. And this infotainment is mated to a 12-speaker Sony setup, and the audio is actually quite good. The audio quality is brilliant, and even when you turn it up, the punchy bass doesn't make any of the plastics rattle, and that is good news. The new Scorpio is also a great alternative for those who are looking at a used Fortuner in the market, because this is larger, this is taller, this has more space than what the older Fortuner did. One big drawback, however, for the Scorpio is that it was a very popular vehicle back in the days for both its generations, because everyone could easily get into the third row from the rear door, from the fifth door. But now you have to drop the second row seats to get into the third row, and that is going to be one big dampener for a lot of Scorpio loyalists. But otherwise, if you're purely looking for the Fortuner, for the space, for the stance, the new Scorpio beats it. The Scorpio, or the Scorpio Classic, is a big hit amongst politicians or such communities that need to carry gunmen, bodyguards, etc. because I'm told it's very easy to get in and out of the car with big rifles. That's for the second row as well as the third row. So I'm told, I don't know. The only shooters this dad carries are cameramen. Anyway, so the advantage for the Scorpio N in that sense is not there with the guns, you see. But the second row seating, let's talk about that. It's pretty flat. I would have liked a little bit more contouring, a little bit more bolstering for long distance comfort. But otherwise, knee room, not a problem at all. Headroom, superb. Foot space, again, very good. Despite this being a rear-wheel driven car, the transmission tunnel is not too tall, so you can place 3 people back here. However, because you have an integrated headrest for the middle row passenger, this space is only safe enough for 2 adults and a kid. The large glass house makes the cabin feel roomier still, and the tall seating ensures a good view outside of the windows. The second row also gets 2 AC vents and 1 USB-C port. Because I foresee the Scorpio N to be a popular road tripping vehicle as well, I think more charging slots should have been provided. There is a 12-volt socket here at the back. You have devices on the sides to keep your phones, but more charging sockets would have been better. What it also needs very badly is a third row of AC vents. Just 2 vents up there in the second row, and that too on the floor, doesn't really help or improve the cooling efficiency back here. It actually, even in this weather, is pretty warm back here. Instead of these speakers, I would rather have AC vents. As far as the comfort goes, well, this space is good enough only for kids. Yes, adults can sit here in a pinch. Definitely someone who's fitter than me should be fine, but you are sitting in a knees up position. Your right knee is going to be higher than the left knee because of the way the floor has been contoured. But yeah, like I said, long distance comfort for this? No, certainly not. If you necessarily need better third row comfort, you will have to look at something like the Kia Carens or the Mahindra XUV700. This one doesn't quite make the cut for long distance third row comfort. And I think going forward, Mahindra should also introduce the option of 2 captain seats in the second row. That would liberate more room here in the third row. Speaking of road trips, the spare wheel is a space saver, though only one size smaller, 245/65R17 on the range-topping model. But the boot is a space saver too. So they've changed the configuration for the third row of seating. It's no more on the side, it is a bench, which means boot space is a big worry. Even this small bag doesn't quite fit. I think it's good enough only for an umbrella. So it also doesn't fold flat. If you want to increase the boot space, that is all that's possible. 2 big suitcases may or may not be possible because, again, if you look at the boot floor, it isn't flat. You also have the mounting for the seat, and that also is quite noisy, especially when going over bumps. It just makes those creaking sounds. So overall, the boot space, I'm not quite impressed with it. What I'm also quite impressed is the kind of view that it offers. You get that commanding view of the road. This has one of the tallest seating that you will find in SUVs around this size and price bracket. But not just that, even the A-pillar, it's quite slim despite the presence of this big handle right here. It's quite slim. Getting a good view around the corners is also not a problem. There are not many blind spots on this vehicle at all. The wing mirrors, they're nice and large, so even in tight parking spaces when you're maneuvering, it becomes quite easy. Yes, with this kind of a length, a 360-degree camera would have definitely helped. You can only get up to 2 cameras depending on the variant you choose, one at the rear, one in the front. Very low resolution cameras, very slow as well, especially if when you're reversing, you notice that the camera feed is coming in, it's choppy, it's slow, so you have to be careful of that. But otherwise, getting a judgment of all the 4 corners of the car is not a problem at all. Like I said, not many blind spots. Cornering visibility is also quite good. And despite those large wing mirrors, the noise insulation is quite good. There's not a lot of wind noise that comes into the cabin. Even the road noise is pretty well controlled. And the powertrain noises, well, hardly anything. Especially for a diesel, it feels so nice and refined and silent. This is something we liked with the XUV700. And even with a lower cost product like the Scorpio, it feels nice and refined. It doesn't have that gravelly note that's constantly creeping into the cabin. I'm looking at you, Fortuner. So yes, this is a pretty silent cabin. The only bits that are noisy are the wipers, pretty noisy. Even the turn blinkers, quite noisy. But yeah, that's about it. Nothing much to complain about. Like the other 2 hits that Mahindra have delivered in the last 2 years, the Mahindra Thar and the XUV700, even the Scorpio continues to use the new set of engines that Mahindra has. That's the 200 PS petrol and the 175 PS diesel. Of course, there's also the 132 PS diesel, which can be had in the absolute entry-level variant of the Scorpio. This is the diesel automatic. It can be had in a manual transmission as well. This would be my choice. I think with the kind of intent that this vehicle has, carrying 3 rows of seats or 3 rows of people, and then also road tripping, also, maybe going on an adventurous drive, etc. I think the diesel auto is the best combination that you could choose. I love the tractability of this engine. I love how the gearbox has been tuned. I've been driving in the city traffic, I've been driving on the highway and also around twisties right now. And the only thing that I'm missing out on right now is paddle shifters behind the wheel. The Petrol Auto 2 is an absolute delight to drive because of the slick automatic transmission. But with single-digit fuel economy figures, it may not appeal to everyone. It has more eager responses than the diesel, of course, and the on-tap 200 PS output gives it equally good tractability for city and highway use. It's also got great refinement and its outright acceleration is quite impressive as well. But if you are more into road tripping, the diesel auto still remains my choice for the Scorpio. So the big question, does it feel like a boat like its granddaddy or daddy, whatever you want to call it? This is the 3rd generation of the Scorpio. So of course, they have made a lot of improvements. And no, the short answer is it doesn't feel like a boat. It feels very much like a car, and that is good news. It also has a completely new suspension setup. And all of this comes together to make sure that this vehicle feels quite confident, feels quite agile, and at the same time doesn't feel unnerving around bends or at speed the way the older Scorpios did. While most dads love investing in FDs, the Scorpio N invests in FDD. That is frequency dependent damping. Essentially the same kind of hardware that you get in the Jeep Compass or Mahindra's own XUV700. But the configuration is slightly different. It has been tuned slightly different for the weight of the car, for the size of the car, etc. Now, what it essentially means is that it is much better at handling bumps, at handling undulations. And while all of that does work quite well, while the ride quality is quite good, you can still feel a lot of vibrations inside the cabin. In fact, you might have heard that in my voice. You can hear it right now as well. I'm not really feeling any jolts in my backside, but there is this constant pulsation inside the cabin coming from the suspension. And that isn't unnerving, it's not really uncomfortable, but it can get irritating at times. Especially when driving on concrete road surfaces, you can feel a lot of these pulsations all throughout the bodywork, through the seats, etc. So yes, the ride quality is quite good. It takes on potholes quite well, but these pulsations are something that I'm not liking much. This is something that we did not face with the XUV 700. What they've also done is added multi-link suspension at the rear, 5 links. It's also got the Watts link type of configuration. That is something that we saw previously in the Ford Endeavour. So the suspension by itself, it sounds quite sophisticated, but at the same time, because this is married to a body-on-frame construction, it doesn't feel, say, as polished as the XUV 700. What further reduces the motion sickness or the feeling of motion sickness is the well-controlled body movement. The body roll is far lesser than the previous Scorpios. That's why I said it doesn't feel like a boat, it feels more like a car. Of course, it is still a body-on-frame SUV, so the center of gravity is higher. In fact, this vehicle sits a lot taller than the monocoque-bodied XUV 700. But the body roll is impressively controlled. For a vehicle this tall, I was expecting it to roll quite a bit, have a lot more side-to-side movement, but it's not that bad. In fact, it doesn't get unnerving at all. Because the body roll is so well controlled, you know exactly how the vehicle is behaving even around tight switchbacks. And it actually feels quite agile despite what the size and the length of this vehicle would suggest. So think of it as something that gives you a nice plush ride, something like the Fortuner, but with slightly touter handling dynamics like we enjoyed with the Ford Endeavour. So it's a nice mix. It's a good heady mix of the both. However, if they could get rid of these pulsations that I'm talking about, it would just make it perfect. Depending on the variant you choose, the Scorpio N rides on 18 or 17-inch wheels, and the ride is quite comfortable even on the larger option. But with only 2 people in the cabin, the rear tends to jitter and bounce quite a bit. A common complaint that people had, especially the city dwellers with the outgoing Scorpio, was that the steering feels a bit too hefty. So they have consciously made the steering lighter with the new Scorpio. At city speeds, it feels brilliant. It's very light. In fact, maneuvering this car around tight parking spaces or even through tight traffic, it's very easy. Making lane changes at highway speeds is also quite easy. The highway stability or the high-speed stability of the vehicle is quite nice. I just wish that at highway speeds, at triple-digit speeds, the steering weighed up better. It just remains far too light even at highway speeds. And even with the variants that have the different drive modes, that zip, zap, zoom, like the XUV 700, even in the zoom mode, you don't really get a lot of heft from the steering. It doesn't weigh up all that well. It just feels very light. Some of you may like it, some of you may not. We also noticed quite a bit of nibble or chatter at the steering, especially on concrete road surfaces. The other bit that I'm impressed with is braking, be it mid-corner braking like this or even braking at highway speeds, braking hard at highway speeds. There's not a pronounced nosedive. That is something that we complained about with the previous generations of the Scorpio. Here it doesn't feel squishy, too soft. So it's not just helping it remove that unnerving feel, it's also making sure that the occupants don't feel uncomfortable under braking. The safety equipment is pretty impressive too, and the top-end models will get you up to 6 airbags, multi-mode traction control, and the 4 Explore variants will get you terrain modes as well. So Scorpio continues to be a rear-wheel driven car. So even in its basic configuration, it is a 4x2. The power is fed to the rear wheels, and like I said, this is the 3rd generation of the ladder frame chassis, and there is a proper 4x4 available as well. But for that, let's go off the road and talk more about it. The off-roading kit includes 4 high and 4 low options, and off-road enthusiasts or even institutional buyers will be able to specify the 4x4 with this kit even in the Z4 variant. The higher trims use a more advanced 4x4 system, which also adds 4 terrain modes that will not only alter the traction control and other electronics, but also the behavior of the 4x4 system. To that effect, it also has a lockable differential. Astonishingly, all the off-roading that you see here is on the stock MRF Wanderer all-terrain tires. If you road trip often and off-roading is something you do only once in a while, I suggest choosing the Scorpio N over the more hardcore Thar. It will offer you better comfort and features and is a better fit as an everyday car. Now here's the interesting bit. The new Mahindra Scorpio is going to traverse multiple segments. It's going to straddle multiple segments. The Safari obviously is in its sights, and it does pip that car on outright power, on refinement as well with this new diesel engine. Of course, it's not new, but new for the Scorpio, and it's a lovely diesel motor. It also pips it on some of the safety tech. Now, it will be interesting to see where the global NCAP ratings come into play. And the car that just crossed us, the Innova Krista, that is going to be another vehicle that this Scorpio is going to rival. Not only with the seating configuration, but again with the kind of equipment that it offers, with the kind of drivability that it offers. And on the lower end of things, it will also rival cars like, well, the Kia Seltos. Not just the Kia Seltos, its sibling as well, the Hyundai Creta. These are monocoque chassis, of course. They are much easier to drive in the city. This is a body on frame, so it certainly feels a lot heftier. But then once you look at the pricing, you are bound to be tempted with something like the Scorpio for the kind of size it offers, for the kind of commanding view that it offers. I mean, from where I'm looking right now, the Kia Seltos almost looks like hatchback on stilts. That's the kind of commanding view that this car gives you. And finally, it's not just the pricing or the size that will define its rivals. It will also rival vehicles like the MG Hector and its three-row variants. And not just on the spec, but also on the connected tech, the internet inside and everything, right? People today want all of that. And there is, in fact, connected tech even on this car. On the topic, the infotainment also comes with a suite of applications, the kind of applications that dads would use. Apps for stocks, apps for food ordering, horoscope, news. You get the point. So like I said, it is going to straddle multiple segments. And it's not just these vehicles around this particular price point. It's also going to target the Toyota Fortuner. And that, of course, is not going to be an easy task. But then it has a lot of artillery by its side to actually pull off something as big as that. The Fortuner is almost 15 lakh more than the introductory asking price of the Scorpio. And while the Fortuner doesn't offer a better kit, the fabled Toyota reliability, the better materials used in the cabin, the after-sales service and the resale value are hard to beat. The bigger question is though, would you choose the new Scorpio over the XUV 700? If you need something that is stylish, sophisticated and easy to drive, it is the XUV 700. But if the robustness of a body-on-frame SUV is what you want from your daily driver, the Scorpio is the easy pick. In a nutshell then, it offers more value than something like the Fortuner, is a big leap forward for a Scorpio, and despite sticking to an arguably old-school structure, it feels agile and easy to drive as a modern-day SUV should.